I realize that I don't need to preach to anyone about taking up your crosses. But sooner or later, everyone faces their own challenges in life, and each of us has to carry a cross of some type. And some of those crosses are pretty heavy. That's why I'm always amazed whenever I meet someone who carries their burdens with poise and courage. In today's gospel, we hear a warning from Jesus, a prophecy that soon he will be carrying his own heavy cross. What's more, he doesn't hide anything from his disciples when he tells them that they too will have crosses of their own to carry. But before he shared this news with them, he wanted to make sure that they were ready to hear it. This was an important moment in his ministry. Today's gospel tells us that Jesus had been praying alone. And we know from the other occasions in the Gospels that Jesus always took time for prayer before important decisions or challenges that he was to face. This was one of those times. As he now directed his focus towards a return to Jerusalem, he knew well what waited for him there. He knew he was going to fulfill his mission and bear the cross of his death. And that is why it was so important for him to make sure that his disciples knew what it meant to be his disciple. He wanted to know before he returned to Jerusalem if they recognized who he was, for he knew that what awaited him there would surely test their faith and their understanding. It was the disciples' exam. It was their test to see if his work had been successful. If they understood who he was, then he knew his ministry would bear fruit and would light a fire in the people that would last forever. So when he asked, it was Simon Peter who exclaimed, "You are the Christ of God." When Jesus heard this, he knew that they understood and his teaching had not been in vain. Yet, they still did not understand fully what the Christ, the Anointed One, really meant. The people were anticipating a Messiah, a conquering hero who would dominate the world and set them free from Roman oppression. Jesus truly was the awaited Messiah, but he was not what they had expected. No one had anticipated that the Anointed One of God would die on a cross and after 3 days be raised from the dead. Even though Jesus had repeatedly forewarned them of what was to come. The disciples' test started out fairly easy. First, Jesus asked what other people were saying about him. Not because he didn't already know, but because he wanted to make sure that the disciples understood and saw the difference. Then the test got tougher as he changed the focus and asked the disciples, "And who do you say that I am?" I suspect the easier part of the test was to tell Jesus what others were saying, because we see the same things in our lives whenever we share with a friend or someone rumors or something that we've heard. It's often easier to point out that someone else had a misunderstanding. But when the focus turns to us personally, it's far different. Then our own thoughts and words are on the spot and are revealed. It was the same for Jesus' disciples. He wanted to know personally and directly from them what they thought. He wanted to know their personal opinion based on their understanding of his ministry. Christ wants the same from us too. Each of us must form our own understanding of who Christ is. To be meaningful and lasting, it needs to be based on personal experience. Following Christ is not about knowing a lot of theology or trivia or reading books. It's about a relationship with Christ. Just like the disciples, today we are asked, who do we say that he is? For our faith to become meaningful in our lives, it should change the way that we think and act that is obvious to others as well as to Christ. Over and over again, Jesus told his disciples that he was returning to Jerusalem for his fate on the cross. It was his mission, his most important gift to salvation, was to fulfill what the Father had sent him to do. This can be hard for us to understand, especially when we look into the crosses of each of our lives and try to understand what is to be accomplished in them. Those answers are not easy to find, and too many times we never know. But we too are disciples. Jesus never promised it would be easy, and in fact, that was just the point of his warning. It was going to be tough. It was going to be a test for them, and they were going to have to take up their crosses daily, not just once and the sorrows were over. This was something that required a constant rededication and a repeated commitment. For us too, we have to be prepared to face the difficulties that may arise in everyday life. Whether large or small, there will be disappointments, challenges, failures, and hurts. Even with knowing this, it is still surprising when our crosses come at unexpected times or from unexpected directions. Luckily, we know that there are more often joys, successes, happinesses that keep us looking to the future with faith. The greatest obstacle for us to meet the challenges that we face is trust. Because if we knew what the outcome was going to be, it wouldn't be nearly as hard. That is why we must have faith that whatever the situation, we know that Christ is walking with us. And we can't have faith without first having a relationship and trusting in God. So, how do we build that trust? Well, first we use what we have available to us. We come to Mass, we receive communion, we seek spiritual help from the Bible. We seek help in the sacraments and in prayer, and in the examples of the saints and others. We have discernment, and we also have spiritual direction, and we take time for meditation and retreats. And we can also follow the example of the psalmist, who today tells us, "O God, you are my God whom I seek. For you my flesh pines and my soul thirsts. You are my help, your right hand upholds me."